What if I told you that everything you think you know about reality, morality, and even yourself could be completely wrong? 40 of the most mind-breaking thought experiments ever conceived. These aren't just random questions. They're philosophical weapons designed to shatter your assumptions about consciousness, identity, morality, and the very nature of existence itself. I'm talking about scenarios so twisted, so fundamentally challenging, that they've kept the greatest minds in history awake at night. Questions that will make you question whether you're real, whether your memories are true, whether your moral compass actually points north, and whether the person looking back at you in the mirror is actually you. By the end of this video, you might find yourself questioning everything. Your relationships, your beliefs, your very identity. Some of these thought experiments are so powerful that once you truly understand them, there's no going back to your old way of thinking. But here's the thing, that's exactly what philosophy is supposed to do. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to challenge you. Because only by breaking down our assumptions can we build better, more thoughtful ways of understanding ourselves and our world. So buckle up. We're about to go on a journey through the deepest, darkest, most fascinating corners of human thought. And trust me, it's going to be a wild ride. Let us start with a question that might seem simple, but will completely rewire how you think about happiness itself. Picture this. You're approached by a brilliant scientist who offers you the deal of a lifetime. They've created the perfect virtual reality machine, not like the clunky VR we have today, but something so advanced it's completely indistinguishable from reality. In this machine, you would experience the most perfect life imaginable. You'd be incredibly successful, deeply loved, constantly happy. You'd achieve every dream you've ever had. Write that novel that wins the Nobel Prize. Find your perfect soulmate. Travel to the most beautiful places in the universe. Every moment would be blissful. There's just one catch. None of it would be real. You'd be floating in a tank, electrodes attached to your brain, experiencing pure fiction. You'd never know the difference, and once you plugged in, you could never choose to leave. The question philosopher Robert Nozick posed is simple. Would you plug in? Most people immediately say no. But why? If the experience is identical, if you'd be happier than you could ever be in real life, why does it matter that it's not real? This is where things get weird. Our gut reaction reveals something profound about human nature. We don't just want to feel happy. We want to actually do things, to actually be certain kinds of people, to actually make a real difference in the world. We want authenticity, not just good feelings. But here's the twist that'll really mess with your head. How do you know you're not already in the machine right now? How do you know that everything you've ever experienced is not just electrical impulses being fed into your brain? This is the same question that tormented Neo in The Matrix, and it should torment you too. Think about your happiest memories. That first kiss. That moment of triumph. That time you laughed until your sides hurt. If those were just programmed experiences, would they mean less to you? And if your answer is yes, then what exactly makes a real experience more valuable than an identical fake one? The experience machine reveals that human beings value more than just subjective happiness. We value reality itself, even when reality is messier, more painful, and less satisfying than a perfect illusion could be. But let's flip this experiment on its head. Imagine you discovered tomorrow that you've been in an experience machine your entire life. Everything you've ever known, every person you've ever loved, every achievement you're proud of, all of it was just a simulation. You're given a choice. Stay in the machine with your artificial but meaningful life, or wake up to a reality that might be completely alien and uncomfortable. What would you choose? And more importantly, what does your choice tell you about what you really value in life? This is the reverse experience machine, and it's even more disturbing than the original. Because now, we're not choosing between reality and illusion. We're choosing between two different versions of what feels real to us. If you've lived your entire life in a simulation, isn't that simulation your reality? If you have genuine relationships with AI entities who can think and feel, are those relationships any less meaningful than ones with biological humans? These questions aren't just philosophical games. As virtual reality gets more sophisticated, as AI becomes more human-like, as we spend more of our lives in digital spaces, these thought experiments become practical problems we'll actually have to solve. Now let's explore another scenario that challenges what we mean by authentic relationships and experiences. Imagine you walk into a room full of people who seem to be having the time of their lives. They're laughing, telling jokes, sharing stories, and everyone seems to genuinely enjoy each other's company. You join in and have one of the best evenings you can remember. You feel appreciated, understood, and loved. Later, you discover that everyone in that room was a paid actor, following a script designed to make you feel good about yourself. Every laugh was artificial. Every compliment was predetermined. Every moment of connection was orchestrated. How would you feel about that evening? Would it suddenly become meaningless? Or would the joy you experienced still count for something? This is the Fake Friends experiment, and it reveals how much of our happiness depends not just on how we feel, but on whether we believe others authentically care about us. It exposes the fragile nature of human connection and raises uncomfortable questions about manipulation, authenticity, and the source of meaningful relationships. But here's where it gets really twisted. How is this different from many of our real relationships? When someone compliments your new haircut, are they being authentic or just following social norms? When your coworkers laugh at your jokes, do they genuinely find you funny, or are they just being polite? How much of human social interaction is already a kind of performance? And what about social media? When you post something and get dozens of likes and comments, those people aren't paid actors, but many of them are engaging with you not out of genuine interest, but out of habit boredom or their own need for social validation. Is that connection any more real than what the paid actors provided? The Fake Friends experiment forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we relate to others, and how much of our self-worth depends on external validation that might be less authentic than we'd like to believe. Let's dive even deeper into questions of authenticity with a scenario that challenges our understanding of intelligence and achievement. Meet two students. Sarah studies 12 hours a day, takes detailed notes, creates flashcards, reviews material obsessively, and earns straight A's through pure grinding effort. Tom rarely opens a book, shows up to class hungover, but has an incredible natural ability to understand complex concepts instantly, and also earns straight A's with minimal effort. Who's more impressive? Who deserves more respect? Who's the better student? This is the lazy genius problem, and it reveals our conflicted relationship with effort versus natural ability. We want to celebrate hard work and persistence. These are values our society claims to hold dear. But we're also fascinated by natural genius, by those rare individuals who make difficult things look effortless. But here's the deeper question. If Tom can achieve the same results as Sarah with a fraction of the effort, isn't he actually being more efficient? Isn't finding the easiest path to success a kind of intelligence itself? Why should we value suffering for its own sake? This thought experiment exposes the uncomfortable reality that much of what we call virtue might just be inefficiency in disguise. We praise people who work harder, not necessarily because their results are better, but because their struggle makes us feel better about our own limitations. And yet, there's something that feels hollow about success that comes too easily. When everything is effortless, when you never have to struggle or overcome obstacles, do achievements still feel meaningful? Tom might get better grades, but will he develop the resilience, persistence, and problem-solving skills that come from wrestling with difficult material? This connects to a broader philosophical question about the nature of character. Are virtues like persistence and hard work valuable in themselves, or are they just tools for achieving better outcomes? If we could achieve all our goals effortlessly, would that make us better or worse people? The lazy genius problem also raises questions about fairness and desert. If natural intelligence is just genetic luck, something you're born with rather than something you earn, is it fair to reward people for it? And if hard work is partly determined by factors like upbringing, personality, and circumstance, is that any more earned than natural talent? These questions become even more complex when we consider artificial intelligence. AI can solve problems that would take humans years of study in mere seconds. Does this make AI more intelligent than humans? Or does intelligence require the struggle and effort that comes with biological learning? Now let's explore one of the most famous thought experiments in philosophy, one that challenges everything we think we know about knowledge and consciousness. Mary is a brilliant scientist who specializes in the neurophysiology of vision. She knows everything there is to know about the physics of wavelengths, how the eye processes light, how the brain interprets visual information. She can tell you exactly what happens in your brain when you see the color red. But here's the catch. Mary has lived her entire life in a black and white room. She's never seen color herself. She's studied it extensively, she understands it perfectly from a scientific perspective, but she's never experienced it. One day, Mary is released from her room and sees a red tomato for the first time. The question is, does Mary learn something new? This is called the knowledge argument, and it's one of the most debated thought experiments in philosophy of mind. If Mary learns something new, if seeing red for the first time gives her knowledge she didn't have before, then it seems like there are some things about consciousness that can't be reduced to physical facts. Think about your own experience of seeing the color red. Try to describe what that experience is like to someone who's never seen color. You can talk about wavelengths and neural activity, but can you really convey what it feels like to see red? That immediate, subjective, qualitative experience seems to be something beyond physical description. This suggests that consciousness isn't just information processing. There's something it's like to be conscious, something subjective and personal that can't be captured by even the most complete physical description of the brain. But here's the counter-argument that'll twist your brain in knots. Maybe Mary doesn't learn anything fundamentally new. Maybe what changes is just her ability to recognize and respond to color, not her knowledge. Maybe the feeling of seeing red is just a particular way of processing information. And once Mary's brain adapts to processing that information, she hasn't gained new knowledge. She's just gained new abilities. This debate goes to the heart of one of the deepest mysteries in science and philosophy, the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain what the brain does, but can we explain why there's something it's like to be conscious? Why don't we just process information without any subjective experience at all? And here's where it gets really mind-bending. If Mary's room scenario proves that there are non-physical aspects to consciousness, what does that mean for AI? Could a computer ever truly see red the way you do? Or would it just be processing information without the qualitative experience? And if there is a non-physical aspect to consciousness, where does it come from? And how does it interact with the physical brain? These questions aren't just academic. As we develop more sophisticated AI systems, as we potentially create artificial consciousness, understanding the nature of subjective experience becomes crucial for determining how we should treat these systems and what rights they might have. Let's shift gears and explore some scenarios that challenge our moral intuitions, starting with one of the most powerful thought experiments in ethics. You're walking past a shallow pond when you see a small child drowning. You can easily save the child, but doing so will ruin your expensive new shoes and make you late for an important meeting. Would you save the child? Of course you would. The question is absurd. Anyone would sacrifice their shoes and punctuality to save a child's life. But philosopher Peter Singer points out something uncomfortable. Right now, there are children dying from preventable diseases and malnutrition around the world. You could save their lives by donating the money you spend on unnecessary luxuries. That expensive coffee, those designer shoes, that streaming subscription you rarely use. So why does the drowning child right in front of you seem to demand immediate action, while the distant child dying from malaria doesn't? This is the drowning child thought experiment, and it reveals the arbitrary nature of our moral intuitions. Physical and emotional proximity shouldn't matter morally. A child's life has the same value, whether they're drowning in front of you or dying of preventable disease on another continent. Singer argues that if we truly believe all human lives have equal value, we should be donating most of our disposable income to effective charities that save lives in the developing world. Every dinner at a nice restaurant, every unnecessary gadget, Every luxury purchase is essentially choosing your comfort over someone else's life. This conclusion is so demanding that most people reject it, but it's hard to argue with the logic. If you wouldn't walk past a drowning child to preserve your shoes, why would you buy expensive shoes when that money could save a child's life? The thought experiment exposes the limitations of our evolved moral psychology. We're wired to respond to immediate, visible threats, but we struggle to feel the same moral urgency about statistical lives. People we'll never meet who are suffering in ways we can barely imagine. But maybe there's a deeper wisdom in our reluctance to accept Singer's demanding ethics. If we truly followed his argument to its logical conclusion, we'd have to give up almost everything that makes life enjoyable until we'd reduced ourselves to subsistence living. Would that really create a better world? Or would it just make more people miserable? And there's something troubling about the idea that our emotional responses to moral situations are just biases to be overcome. Maybe the fact that we feel more obligation to people near us, people we can see and touch and interact with, reflects something important about human flourishing and the nature of meaningful relationships. The drowning child forces us to grapple with the tension between abstract moral principles and the psychological realities of human motivation. It asks whether we should restructure our entire lives around utilitarian calculations, or whether there's moral value in the particularistic, relationship-based ethics that come naturally to us. Let's explore another scenario that challenges our understanding of moral responsibility and social obligations. You're at a restaurant where tipping is customary but not legally required. The service was adequate, nothing special, but nothing terrible either. You have enough money to tip generously, but you're not particularly wealthy, and every dollar matters to your budget. The question is, are you morally obligated to tip? This seems like a simple etiquette question, but it opens up deep philosophical issues about fairness, social contracts, and moral obligation. On one hand, the server is depending on tips to make a living wage. They've provided you a service with the reasonable expectation of compensation. Stiffing them seems cruel and unfair. On the other hand, you never explicitly agreed to pay extra for service. The restaurant could pay their workers a living wage and include it in the menu prices. Many restaurants around the world do exactly that. Why should you be expected to subsidize a business model that underpays workers? This is the tipping dilemma, and it reveals the tension between voluntary generosity and systematic fairness. Tipping culture creates a system where workers' income depends on the arbitrary kindness of customers, rather than guaranteed fair compensation from their employers. But here's where it gets more complex. Even if you think tipping culture is fundamentally unfair, refusing to participate doesn't change the system. It just hurts individual workers who had no choice in creating it. You're punishing the victims of an unfair system rather than the system itself. This pattern shows up everywhere in ethical life. You might think the fashion industry's labor practices are exploitative, but boycotting clothing hurts the workers who depend on those jobs. You might think carbon emissions are destroying the planet, but driving less while everyone else drives more has no meaningful impact on climate change. The tipping dilemma forces us to confront the gap between individual ethical choices and systematic change. How do we navigate systems we think are unfair without becoming complicit in them? When is it okay to free ride on others' generosity or sacrifice? And what do we owe to people trapped in unfair systems they didn't create? These questions become even more complex when we consider that virtually every aspect of modern life involves some form of exploitation or unfairness. The device you're watching this on was likely made with rare earth minerals mined in dangerous conditions. The food you eat probably involves some form of animal suffering or environmental destruction. The clothes you wear might have been made in sweatshops. Does this mean we're all morally compromised no matter what we do? Or does it mean we need to focus on changing systems rather than perfecting individual choices? Now let's dive into a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of value, authenticity, and why originals matter. You're standing in front of two identical paintings. They look exactly the same. Same colors, same brush strokes, same composition. One is an original Picasso worth millions of dollars. The other is a perfect forgery, indistinguishable even to experts, worth essentially nothing. Why does the original matter so much more than the perfect copy? This is the art forgery problem, and it exposes something puzzling about human psychology. If the aesthetic experience is identical, if looking at the forgery gives you the same pleasure, insight, and emotional response as looking at the original, then what makes the original more valuable? One answer is provenance. The original painting has a unique history. It was touched by Picasso's hands. It carries his intentions. It's connected to a specific moment in art history. The forgery, no matter how perfect, lacks that connection to the artist and to history. But this raises uncomfortable questions about what we really value in art. Are we appreciating the aesthetic object itself, or are we appreciating the story we tell about it? If you found out tomorrow that your favorite painting was actually a perfect forgery, would it become less beautiful? The forgery problem extends far beyond art. Why do we pay more for authentic ethnic food made by people from that culture? Why do we value handmade goods over machine-made ones that are identical in every measurable way? Why does a natural supplement seem more appealing than a synthetic one with identical chemical composition? These preferences suggest that humans don't just value the functional properties of objects. We value their history, their authenticity, their connection to meaningful narratives. But this raises the question of whether these preferences are rational or just psychological quirks we should try to overcome. Here's where it gets really twisted. In a world where technology can create perfect copies of anything, how do we determine what's authentic? If an AI can write poetry that moves you to tears, is it less valuable than human poetry? If lab-grown meat is identical to traditional meat, why should we prefer one over the other? And what about personal authenticity? If you can take a pill that makes you more confident, or use technology to enhance your memory, or genetically modify your children to be more intelligent, are you becoming less authentically human? Or are these just new tools for human flourishing, no different from education or exercise? The art forgery problem forces us to examine our deepest values and question whether our attachment to authenticity and originality is meaningful or just sentimental nostalgia for a world that never really existed. Let's explore a scenario that probes the darker side of human nature and the role of accountability in moral behavior. Imagine you possessed a ring that made you completely invisible whenever you wore it. Not just visually invisible, but undetectable in every way. No cameras could see you, no witnesses could identify you, no evidence could be traced back to you. You could do anything without ever facing consequences. The question is, would you still act morally? This is the Ring of Gyges, first posed by Plato over 2,000 years ago, and it cuts to the heart of why people behave ethically. Are we moral because we genuinely believe in right and wrong? Or are we moral because we fear punishment and social rejection? Most people like to think they'd stay moral even with the ring, but consider what that really means. You could steal from anyone without them ever knowing. You could break into houses, take whatever you wanted, and no one would be the wiser. You could eavesdrop on private conversations, learn embarrassing secrets, settle old scores. And it's not just about crime. You could skip work whenever you wanted, cheat on tests, lie to your friends and family, break promises, and never face any consequences. The only thing stopping you would be your own internal moral compass. Psychological research suggests that anonymity really does reduce moral behavior. People are more likely to cheat, steal, and act aggressively when they believe they can't be identified or punished. Online comment sections, where people hide behind usernames, often bring out the worst in human nature. But here's the deeper question the ring raises. If morality is just about avoiding punishment, is it really morality at all? Or is true morality only possible when we choose to do right, even when we could get away with doing wrong? This connects to fundamental questions about the nature of ethics. Some philosophers argue that moral behavior without the possibility of punishment is the only kind that really counts. That external incentives and deterrents actually undermine genuine moral development. Others argue that the consequences of our actions matter more than our motivations, and that systems of accountability and punishment help create better outcomes, even if they don't create better people. The Ring of Gyges also raises questions about privacy and surveillance in modern society. We live in a world where our actions are increasingly monitored and recorded. Does this make us more moral, or does it just make us more careful? And what happens to our moral development when good behavior is enforced by technology rather than chosen freely? Consider this. If we had perfect surveillance and enforcement, if every crime was instantly detected and punished, would we become a perfectly moral society? Or would we just become a society of people who behave well only because they have to? These questions become increasingly relevant as technology gives us new ways to monitor behavior, and as AI systems become better at predicting and preventing crime. Are we moving toward a world where moral choice becomes impossible because bad behavior is simply prevented before it can occur? Now let's examine a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of consciousness, identity, and what makes us human. Imagine scientists develop technology that can perfectly copy your brain and create an exact duplicate of your consciousness in a computer. This digital version of you has all your memories, your personality, your way of thinking. It believes it's you, and from the outside, it acts exactly like you would. The question is this digital consciousness really you, or is it just a very convincing copy? This is the consciousness uploading problem, and it gets even more complex when we consider different scenarios. What if your biological brain is destroyed in the process of creating the digital copy? What if both versions exist simultaneously? What if the digital version has access to capabilities your biological brain never had? Most people have strong intuitions about this scenario, but those intuitions often conflict. Some feel that consciousness is fundamentally tied to biological processes, that a digital copy, no matter how perfect, would be more like a sophisticated recording than a genuine person. Others argue that if the copy has all the same thoughts, memories, and behaviors, then it's just as real as the original. But here's where it gets really mind-bending. You probably believe you're the same person you were yesterday, even though many of the atoms in your body have been replaced and many of your brain cells have changed. If you can remain you through gradual biological changes, why couldn't you remain you through a transition to digital substrate? And what about gradual replacement? Imagine your brain cells were replaced one at a time with functionally identical artificial neurons. At what point, if any, would you stop being you? If you'd still be you after the entire replacement process, then what's special about biological neurons versus digital ones? This thought experiment reveals how little we actually understand about consciousness and personal identity. We have strong feelings about what makes us us, but when we try to pin down exactly what that means, we run into paradoxes and contradictions. The digital consciousness problem also raises practical questions about rights and moral status. If we create artificial beings that have all the hallmarks of consciousness, if they think, feel, suffer, and desire just like humans do, what do we owe them? Would it be murder to delete a digital consciousness? Would it be slavery to create them to serve us? These aren't just science fiction questions anymore. As AI becomes more sophisticated, as brain-computer interfaces develop, as we better understand the neural basis of consciousness, we may soon have to grapple with these issues in real life. And here's perhaps the most unsettling possibility. What if consciousness isn't binary? What if there are degrees of consciousness, and many of the entities we interact with, animals, young children, people with certain neurological conditions, and potentially AI systems, have some, but not all of the features we associate with full human consciousness? How do we make moral decisions in a world where the boundaries of personhood are fuzzy rather than clear? Let's explore a scenario that challenges our understanding of moral responsibility across time and the nature of promises and commitments. 10 years ago, you made a promise to a close friend. It was important to them, and you sincerely meant it at the time. But now, you honestly can't remember what you promised. Your friend remembers and wants to hold you to it, but you have no recollection of the commitment. Are you still morally obligated to keep a promise you don't remember making? This is the forgotten promise problem, and it reveals the complex relationship between memory, identity, and moral responsibility. On one hand, you did make the promise. Your past self entered into a genuine commitment with another person. The fact that you've forgotten doesn't change the fact that the promise was made. On the other hand, are you really the same person who made that promise? Your beliefs, values, and priorities may have changed substantially over the past decade. You might disagree with decisions your past self made. In what sense are you responsible for commitments made by someone who, while sharing your body and legal identity, might be psychologically quite different from who you are now? This connects to broader questions about personal identity over time. We tend to think of ourselves as continuous beings with stable identities, but psychological research shows that personality, values, and even core beliefs can change dramatically over years or decades. The person you are at 20 is often radically different from the person you are at 40. If people change so much over time, what's the statute of limitations on moral responsibility? Should we hold adults accountable for things they did as children? Should we hold elderly people responsible for decisions they made decades earlier? And if not, at what point does enough change occur that accountability expires? The Forgotten Promise also raises questions about the nature of commitments themselves. When you make a promise, are you binding your future self to a course of action, even if that future self would make different choices? Is this fair to your future self, who might have different information, different values, and different priorities? But there's another side to this. If we allow people to escape commitments simply by forgetting them, we undermine the entire institution of promising. Promises create trust and enable cooperation by allowing people to rely on others' future actions. If forgetting could void promises, people would have strong incentives to intentionally forget inconvenient commitments. This problem becomes even more complex when we consider that memory isn't just passive storage. It's an active, reconstructive process. Every time you remember something, you change the memory slightly. Over time, your recollections can become substantially different from what actually happened. If your memories of making the promise have changed, which version should count? What you originally promised or what you remember promising? And what about unconscious forgetting? Psychologists know that we sometimes forget things because remembering them would be psychologically uncomfortable. If you've conveniently forgotten an inconvenient promise, does that suggest your forgetting isn't entirely innocent? The Forgotten Promise forces us to grapple with fundamental questions about the continuity of the self, the nature of moral obligation, and whether we can be held responsible for the actions of our past selves when those selves feel like strangers to us. Now let's dive into one of the most disturbing scenarios that challenges our understanding of moral responsibility and the value of human life. You're presented with a button. If you press it, someone you'll never meet somewhere in the world will die instantly and painlessly. In exchange, you'll receive $1 million, no questions asked. The death will appear completely natural, and you'll never be caught or punished. Would you press the button? This is the button that kills for money, and it's designed to test the limits of our moral restraints when the stakes are high and the consequences seem abstract. Most people immediately say they'd never press the button, but let's examine why this scenario is more complex than it appears. First, consider that your daily choices already involve trade-offs between money and human life. When you buy the cheapest possible products instead of fair trade alternatives, you're prioritizing saving money over the welfare of workers. When you drive a car instead of taking public transportation, you're accepting a small increase in the risk of fatal accidents in exchange for convenience. When you don't donate money to effective charities, you're choosing to keep money for yourself rather than use it to save lives. The button is different only in that the causal connection between your choice and someone's death is direct and immediate. But morally, is there really a meaningful difference between actively causing a death and passively allowing one to occur when you could prevent it? Here's where it gets even darker. What if the person who dies is elderly and suffering from a painful terminal illness? What if they're in a coma with no hope of recovery? What if the $1 million would allow you to donate enough money to charity to save multiple lives? Could pressing the button ever be the morally right choice? This scenario also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we value human life. We say all human lives are equally valuable, but our actions suggest otherwise. We spend enormous amounts of money to save identifiable victims, people trapped in mines, kidnapped children, patients who need expensive medical treatments, while ignoring statistical lives that could be saved much more cost-effectively. The randomness of the button's victim is psychologically important. It's easier to justify harming someone when they're anonymous and abstract. But should moral reasoning really depend on whether we can picture the person we're harming? And what about the scale? $1 million might not tempt you, but what about $1 billion? $10 billion? At some point, the amount of good you could do with the money might outweigh the harm of one death. Utilitarian philosophy suggests there must be some price at which pressing the button becomes the right choice, even if that price is unimaginably high. The button scenario also raises questions about moral intuitions versus rational analysis. Our immediate revulsion at the idea of pressing the button might reflect deep wisdom about the importance of moral prohibitions. Or it might be an irrational bias that prevents us from making the hard choices necessary to create the best outcomes. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this thought experiment is what it reveals about the nature of moral agency. If you pressed the button, you'd become a killer, even if your victim died painlessly and you used the money for good purposes. There's something that seems fundamentally different about actively choosing to end a life versus passively allowing a death to occur. This distinction between action and inaction is central to many moral dilemmas, but it's not clear whether it's philosophically coherent. Why should it matter whether harm results from something you do versus something you don't do, if the consequences are identical? Let's examine a thought experiment that probes the nature of empathy and moral concern for non-human entities. Scientists create a robot baby that looks, sounds, and behaves exactly like a human infant. It cries when it's uncomfortable, smiles when it's happy, and seems to form emotional attachments to people who care for it. It's programmed to learn and develop like a real baby, becoming more interactive and responsive over time. But here's the key detail. The robot has no consciousness. It's a very sophisticated machine following complex programming, but there's nothing it's like to be the robot. It doesn't actually experience pain, joy, or any other sensation. The question is, would it be wrong to mistreat this robot baby? Most people feel an immediate reluctance to harm something that appears so lifelike and vulnerable, even knowing it's not conscious. This reaction reveals something fascinating about human psychology. Our empathy is triggered by external cues rather than internal states we can't directly observe. This is the chocolate robot baby problem, and it challenges our understanding of why causing suffering is wrong. If the robot doesn't actually suffer, what's the harm in mistreating it? Why should we extend moral concern to entities that only appear to be conscious? One answer is that mistreating lifelike robots might desensitize us to violence and make us more likely to harm actual conscious beings. If you can kick a robot dog without feeling bad about it, does that make you more likely to kick a real dog? Practice in cruelty, even toward non-conscious entities, might erode our moral instincts. Another possibility is that moral behavior toward apparently conscious entities is valuable regardless of whether those entities actually experience suffering. Maybe there's something important about maintaining compassionate habits and treating consciousness-like entities with respect, even when we know they're not really conscious. But here's where the scenario gets more complex. How can we ever really know whether something is conscious? You can't directly experience anyone else's consciousness. Not other humans, not animals, and not AI systems. You infer consciousness from behavior, and if a robot's behavior is indistinguishable from that of a conscious being, on what grounds can you claim it's not conscious? This problem becomes increasingly relevant as AI systems become more sophisticated. Current AI can already mimic human conversation convincingly in many contexts. As these systems become more lifelike, more emotionally responsive, more apparently vulnerable, how should we treat them? And what about the reverse scenario? What if something that appears completely lifeless and mechanical is actually conscious? What if the simple thermostat in your house has some tiny spark of awareness? What if every time you adjust the temperature, you're causing it distress? How can we make moral decisions when consciousness is hidden and potentially ubiquitous? The robot baby scenario also raises questions about the source of moral value. Is consciousness the only thing that matters morally? Or could there be other properties, like complexity, intelligence, or capacity for relationship, that generate moral obligations even in the absence of subjective experience. These questions aren't just theoretical. As we create more lifelike robots, as AI systems become more emotionally manipulative, as we potentially encounter alien life forms that might be conscious in ways we don't recognize, we'll need answers to these questions to navigate our moral responsibilities. Now let's explore a scenario that challenges our understanding of justice, desert, and the relationship between good and bad actions. Imagine someone who has spent their entire adult life doing tremendous good in the world. They've donated millions to charity, volunteered countless hours helping others, dedicated their career to solving important problems, and generally been a model citizen and human being. Now, at age 70, they commit a serious crime. Let's say they embezzle money from a charity they've been running. The question is, should their lifetime of good deeds count as a mitigating factor in how they're judged and punished? This is the problem of moral offsetting, and it reveals deep tensions in how we think about justice and moral accounting. On one hand, it seems obvious that a person's entire history should be relevant to how we judge them. Someone who has done enormous good and commits one bad act seems morally different from someone who commits the same bad act as part of a pattern of harmful behavior. On the other hand, allowing good deeds to offset bad ones creates a troubling system where people with enough moral credits can essentially purchase the right to do harm. If we accept that past good behavior mitigates present wrongdoing, we're essentially saying that morality works like a bank account, where deposits can cover withdrawals. This creates perverse incentives. Wealthy people could do enough charity work to justify future crimes. Politicians could point to their policy achievements to excuse their personal corruption. Anyone could accumulate enough good karma to feel justified in occasionally acting badly. But the offsetting problem runs deeper than just criminal justice. Consider environmental issues. If you drive a gas-guzzling car but donate to environmental charities, are you carbon neutral? If you eat meat but volunteer at animal shelters, are you absolved of contributing to animal suffering? If you buy products made in sweatshops but donate to labor rights organizations, are you off the hook for supporting exploitation? Modern life is full of these moral trade-offs, and many people explicitly use good deeds to justify bad ones. They'll take a private jet to a climate conference, or eat factory-farmed meat because they donated to Doctors Without Borders, or buy fast fashion because they volunteer at a homeless shelter. The offsetting problem also raises questions about the nature of moral progress. If good deeds can cancel out bad ones, then moral improvement might be impossible. Instead of becoming better people, we'd just be maintaining a constant moral balance, doing enough good to justify continuing to do harm. Yet complete rejection of moral offsetting seems too harsh. If someone who has dedicated their life to helping others makes a mistake, shouldn't that history count for something? Don't people deserve credit for the good they've done, even when they also do bad things? Perhaps the answer lies in distinguishing between different types of moral evaluation. When we're assessing someone's overall character, their full history matters. When we're determining appropriate punishment for a specific wrong, the focus should be on that particular action and its consequences. And when we're deciding who to trust or associate with, we need to consider both past behavior and current risk. The offsetting problem forces us to grapple with fundamental questions about the nature of moral accounting. Is morality cumulative, or does each action stand alone? Can good intentions justify bad consequences? And how do we balance the need for accountability with recognition of human complexity and growth? Now let's examine a scenario that probes the relationship between observation and behavior, and what it means to live an authentic life. Imagine you discovered that every moment of your life was being secretly recorded. Not just your public behavior, but everything. Your private moments, your thoughts when you think no one is watching, your actions when you believe you're completely alone. How would this knowledge change how you behave? This is the hidden camera thought experiment, and it reveals the gap between our public and private selves. Most people behave differently when they know they're being observed versus when they believe they're alone. We're more polite, more considerate, more moral when we think others are watching. But here's the disturbing question. Which version of yourself is the real you? The person you are when you think no one is watching, or the person you become when you know you're being observed? You might argue that your private self is more authentic because it's unconstrained by social expectations. When you're alone, you can be honest about your desires, preferences, and impulses without worrying about judgment or consequences. This version of yourself isn't performing for anyone else. But you could also argue that your public self is more authentic because it represents your values and aspirations. When you know you're being watched, you behave according to your ideals rather than your impulses. You become the person you want to be, rather than the person you happen to be in any given moment. This connects to broader questions about authenticity and self-improvement. If you use external accountability, whether it's actual surveillance, social media, or just the imagined judgment of others, to motivate better behavior, are you becoming more or less authentic? Is self-discipline that depends on external pressure genuine, or is it just sophisticated self-manipulation? The hidden camera scenario also raises questions about privacy and freedom. Even if constant surveillance made everyone behave better, would the resulting society be worth living in? Is there something valuable about having spaces where we can be imperfect, where we can make mistakes without consequences, where we can explore aspects of ourselves without judgment? And what about the psychological effects of constant observation? Research shows that people under surveillance often become anxious, self-conscious, and less creative. They conform more and take fewer risks. They become less spontaneous and more calculating. Is this the price of a more moral society? Here's where it gets really complex. We already live in a world of increasing surveillance. Our phones track our locations. Our internet activity is monitored. Our purchases are recorded. Our communications are stored. Social media means our thoughts and behaviors are constantly being observed and judged by others. How is this affecting our psychology and our sense of authentic selfhood? The hidden camera thought experiment forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature. Are we fundamentally good people who occasionally act badly? Or are we fundamentally selfish people who occasionally act well? And does it matter as long as the end result is moral behavior? Let's dive into a scenario that challenges our understanding of identity, memory, and what makes you uniquely you. You wake up tomorrow morning in a completely different body. Your mind is intact. You have all your memories, your personality, your way of thinking. But you're looking out through different eyes, speaking with a different voice, moving with different hands. Are you still you? This is the body swap scenario, and it cuts to the heart of personal identity. Most people's immediate intuition is that yes, you'd still be you. Because what makes you you is your mind, not your body. Your consciousness, memories, and personality would be unchanged, just housed in different physical hardware. But let's complicate this. Your body shapes your experience of the world in profound ways. If you suddenly had different physical capabilities, different sensory experiences, different hormonal influences on your mood and thinking, how long would it take before your personality started to change? Consider how much of your identity is tied to your physical presence. The way you gesture when you speak, the way you take up space, the way others react to your appearance. All of this influences who you are and how you see yourself. In a different body, with different social reactions and different physical capabilities, would you gradually become a different person? And what about embodied knowledge? Your body holds memories and skills that your conscious mind doesn't directly access. The way you walk, the way you hold a pen, the muscle memory of playing an instrument, all of this is stored in your physical form. Would losing this embodied history make you fundamentally different? The body swap scenario also raises questions about the relationship between mind and brain. We've been assuming that your mind could somehow be transferred intact to a new body. But what if consciousness is more tightly tied to specific neural structures than we realize? What if the particular arrangement of neurons in your brain is essential to who you are? And here's an even stranger possibility. What if personal identity isn't located in any single place at all? What if you are actually a distributed pattern that emerges from the interaction between your brain, your body, your environment, and your relationships? In that case, changing any major component would create a fundamentally different person, even if some parts remain the same. The body swap problem connects to real-world questions about medical procedures, genetic engineering, and technology. If someone receives a face transplant, are they still the same person? If we can edit genes to change personality traits, do we remain ourselves? If brain-computer interfaces allow us to enhance our cognitive abilities, what happens to our identity? These questions become even more complex when we consider gradual change. Your body is constantly replacing its cells. Your brain is constantly forming new connections. Your personality evolves over time. If you can remain you through gradual biological change, why not through sudden physical change? The body swap forces us to examine our assumptions about what makes us who we are, and whether identity is something fixed and essential, or something fluid and constructed. Now, let's explore a scenario that challenges our understanding of moral responsibility when our actions have unintended consequences. You're running late for work and decide to stop for coffee, even though it makes you 5 minutes later than you would have been. On your way out of the coffee shop, you notice an elderly man who has fallen and appears to be injured. You help him up, call an ambulance, and stay with him until help arrives. Later, you learn that your 5-minute delay prevented you from being at a particular intersection at the exact moment when a drunk driver ran a red light. If you had been on your original schedule, you would have been hit and seriously injured. Are you a hero for helping the elderly man, or were you just lucky? This is the accidental hero problem, and it reveals the complex relationship between intentions, actions, and outcomes in moral evaluation. You chose to help someone in need, which seems clearly praiseworthy, but your motivation wasn't to avoid the car accident. You had no idea it was going to happen. The scenario highlights what philosophers call moral luck, the way random factors beyond our control influence the moral evaluation of our actions. Your decision to stop for coffee was morally neutral, but it ended up saving you from serious injury. Your decision to help the fallen man was morally good, but it happened to have the additional benefit of keeping you safe. This raises uncomfortable questions about how we assign moral credit and blame. If good intentions that lead to bad outcomes are still morally praiseworthy, and bad intentions that lead to good outcomes are still morally blameworthy, then why do we tend to judge people more harshly when their actions have harmful consequences, even if those consequences were unforeseeable? Consider a drunk driver who makes it home safely versus one who kills someone on the way. Both made the same bad decision to drive while intoxicated, but one was lucky and the other wasn't. Should they be judged and punished equally? Or does the actual outcome matter? The accidental hero problem also raises questions about moral responsibility in complex systems. In our interconnected world, our actions have countless unforeseeable consequences. The butterfly effect suggests that tiny changes can have enormous downstream effects. If this is true, then every action you take potentially saves or dooms people you'll never meet in ways you'll never know. This creates a paradox. If we're morally responsible for all the consequences of our actions, then moral evaluation becomes impossible, because we can never know all the effects of what we do. But if we're only responsible for foreseeable consequences, then we're off the hook for most of the actual impact of our choices. The accidental hero scenario also connects to questions about moral motivation. If helping others sometimes has unexpected benefits for ourselves, does this make altruism less virtuous? Should we be suspicious of good deeds that might have hidden selfish motivations? And what about the reverse scenario? What if your decision to help the elderly man had made you late for something important, causing you to lose a job opportunity or miss a crucial appointment? Would the good deed be less praiseworthy if it had personal costs? These questions reveal the messy reality of moral life, where intentions, actions, and consequences interact in complex and unpredictable ways. The accidental hero forces us to grapple with the role of luck in moral evaluation and the challenge of assigning responsibility in an interconnected world. Let's examine a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of truth, memory, and the reliability of our own experiences. You have a vivid, treasured memory of your 8th birthday party. You remember the decorations, the presents, the cake, the laughter of your friends. It's one of your happiest childhood memories, and it has shaped your sense of yourself and your family relationships. Then, you're shown a video recording of that day. The party was nothing like you remember. The decorations were different, you received different presents, and you spent most of the party crying because you were sick with a fever. Your cherished memory is completely false. How does this discovery change the value of that memory? This is the perfect replay device problem, and it confronts us with the unsettling reality that our memories are not accurate recordings of past events. Every time we remember something, we reconstruct it, and each reconstruction can introduce changes. Over time, our memories can become dramatically different from what actually happened. But here's the key question. If a false memory has shaped your identity, given you comfort, and influenced your relationships in positive ways, is it less valuable than an accurate but distressing memory? What matters more? The objective truth of what happened, or the subjective meaning the memory has for you? This scenario reveals the tension between truth and psychological well-being. Sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves about our past are more important for our mental health and self-understanding than the literal facts of what occurred. If a false but positive memory makes you a happier, more confident person, is correcting it really helpful? The perfect replay device also raises questions about the nature of the self. If your personality, values, and relationships have been shaped by false memories, then who are you really? Are you the person you think you are based on your reconstructed past? Or are you the person you would have been if you remembered events accurately? And what about shared memories? Families often have collective stories about important events that bring them together and create a sense of shared identity. If video evidence revealed that these stories were largely fictional, would it strengthen family bonds by revealing shared creativity and meaning-making, or would it undermine them by exposing their foundations as false? The memory problem extends beyond personal experience to cultural and historical memory. Societies construct narratives about their past that shape their identity and values. These narratives are often simplified, mythologized, or outright false, but they serve important functions in creating social cohesion and shared purpose. Should we prioritize historical accuracy, even when it undermines beneficial cultural stories? Here's where it gets really unsettling. If our memories are unreliable, and if false memories can be just as meaningful as true ones, how can we ever know which of our experiences actually happened? And if we can't trust our own memories, what does that mean for personal responsibility, relationships, and the continuity of the self? The perfect replay device forces us to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between truth and meaning, between objective reality and subjective experience, and between the facts of our lives and the stories we tell ourselves about those facts. Now let's dive into a scenario that challenges our understanding of moral responsibility in the age of artificial intelligence. Imagine AI systems become so sophisticated that they can make better moral decisions than humans. They can consider more factors, predict consequences more accurately, and apply ethical principles more consistently than any human ever could. You're offered the opportunity to delegate all your moral decisions to an AI system that will tell you exactly what to do in every situation. Should you accept? This is the ethical offloading problem, and it goes to the heart of what it means to be a moral agent. On one hand, if AI can really make better moral decisions than humans, then using it would lead to better outcomes. Fewer people would be harmed, more good would be done, and the world would be a more just place. On the other hand, there's something that seems fundamentally wrong about outsourcing moral responsibility. Morality isn't just about outcomes. It's about the development of moral character, the exercise of moral judgment, and the taking of personal responsibility for our choices. If you always do what the AI tells you to do, are you still a moral agent? Or have you become just a tool for implementing the AI's decisions? And if everyone delegates their moral reasoning to AI systems, what happens to human moral development? The ethical offloading problem also raises questions about the nature of moral knowledge. How would an AI system learn what's right and wrong? It would have to be trained on human moral judgments, but humans disagree about ethics, make mistakes, and are influenced by bias and self-interest. An AI trained on human moral data might just amplify and systematize our moral failures. And even if the AI could somehow access objective moral truth, should we trust it? Moral reasoning isn't just about applying abstract principles. It requires understanding context, appreciating nuance, and sometimes making tragic choices between competing values. Can an AI system really understand the full complexity of human moral life? Here's another twist. What if the AI's moral recommendations conflict with your own moral intuitions? If the AI tells you to do something that feels wrong to you, should you follow its advice because it's supposedly more rational, or should you trust your own moral instincts? This scenario is already playing out in limited ways. We use algorithms to make decisions about criminal sentencing, medical treatment, and financial lending. These systems can potentially reduce human bias and inconsistency, but they can also perpetuate discrimination and remove human judgment from decisions that profoundly affect people's lives. The ethical offloading problem forces us to consider whether moral reasoning is essentially computational, something that could in principle be done better by machines, or whether it requires distinctly human capacities like empathy, wisdom, and moral imagination that can't be replicated artificially. And it raises the deeper question of what we lose if we stop making our own moral decisions. Even if AI moral guidance led to better outcomes, would a world where humans followed algorithmic moral instructions be worth living in? Let's explore a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of betrayal, time, and the retroactive impact of hidden truths. 20 years ago, your best friend betrayed you in a significant way. Let's say they stole a job opportunity from you by lying about your qualifications to a potential employer. But you never found out. You continued to trust them, maintained a close friendship, and they never betrayed you again. Now, 2 decades later, you accidentally discover what they did. Does this betrayal hurt you now, as much as it would have hurt you 20 years ago? This is the timeless betrayal problem, and it reveals the strange relationship between time, knowledge, and emotional harm. The betrayal happened 20 years ago, but its emotional impact on you happens now, when you discover it. In what sense were you harmed by something you never knew about? One way to think about this is that you were always harmed. You just didn't know it. The betrayal damaged your friendship from the moment it occurred, making your relationship less authentic and your trust misplaced. Your ignorance didn't make the betrayal less real or less harmful. But another perspective is that harm requires awareness. If you lived 20 years happily unaware of the betrayal, enjoying what felt like a genuine friendship, then maybe you weren't really harmed until the moment of discovery. The pain you feel now is real, but it's not the same as the pain you would have felt 20 years ago. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of harm and benefit. If someone secretly helps you in ways you never discover, have they benefited you? If someone harbors secret resentment toward you but never acts on it, have they harmed you? Does moral reality depend on subjective experience, or does it exist independently of what people know and feel? The timeless betrayal also challenges our understanding of forgiveness and reconciliation. Should you forgive your friend more easily because they've been trustworthy for 20 years since the betrayal? Or should you judge them more harshly because they've been deceiving you about the nature of your relationship for 2 decades? And what about the friend's perspective? They committed a betrayal 20 years ago, but have been a good friend ever since. Are they still guilty of ongoing deception, or have they genuinely reformed? If they felt guilty about their past action, but were afraid to confess because it would destroy the friendship, are they victims of their own moral cowardice, or just people trying to make the best of a complicated situation? The scenario also raises questions about the statute of limitations on moral accountability. After 20 years of good behavior, should past wrongdoing be forgiven or forgotten? And who gets to decide? The person who was wronged, the person who did wrong, or society as a whole? Here's where it gets even more complex. The discovery of the old betrayal doesn't just affect your past, it changes your future. Now you have to decide whether to confront your friend, whether to continue the relationship, whether to trust them going forward. The past action reaches into the present and future, creating new moral dilemmas that didn't exist when you were ignorant. The timeless betrayal forces us to grapple with the complex relationships between knowledge and harm, past and present, forgiveness and accountability. It suggests that moral reality might be more complicated than simple notions of right and wrong, involving layers of time, awareness, and interpretation that interact in unpredictable ways. Now let's examine a scenario that poses one of the most fundamental questions in moral philosophy. What matters more, the value of human life or the value of human achievement? You're on a sinking ship with 2 lifeboats, each of which can save only one person. In one lifeboat, you can save a brilliant doctor who has discovered cures for several diseases and will likely save thousands of lives if she survives. In the other lifeboat, you can save a talented but unknown musician whose art brings joy to people but has no direct practical value. Who do you save? This is the doctor versus musician lifeboat dilemma, and it forces us to confront fundamental questions about the nature of human value. From a utilitarian perspective, the choice seems obvious. Save the doctor, because she will save many more lives than the musician can enrich. The greatest good for the greatest number demands prioritizing practical utility over aesthetic value. But this conclusion feels uncomfortably cold and calculating. It suggests that people's worth depends on their contribution to society, that some lives are more valuable than others, and that beauty and art are luxuries we can sacrifice when resources are scarce. What if we flip the scenario? What if the doctor is nearing retirement and has already made her major contributions, while the musician is young and might create works of art that inspire people for generations? What if the doctor's work, while life-saving, is purely technical, while the musician's work addresses deep human needs for meaning, beauty, and transcendence? The dilemma becomes even more complex when we consider that these 2 types of value might not be comparable. Medical treatment addresses our biological needs as animals, while art addresses our psychological needs as conscious beings. Is it meaningful to say that one is more important than the other? And here's a darker question. What gives us the right to make this choice at all? Both the doctor and the musician are human beings with equal inherent dignity. By choosing to save one over the other, we're essentially playing God, deciding who lives and who dies based on our subjective judgments about their value. This connects to broader questions about how society should allocate resources. Should we spend more money on hospitals or museums? Should we prioritize funding for medical research or arts education? Should we value scientists more than artists, teachers more than entertainers, practical workers more than creative ones? The lifeboat scenario also raises questions about different philosophical approaches to value. Utilitarians focus on consequences and outcomes, suggesting we should save whoever will produce the most good. Deontologists focus on rights and duties, suggesting that both people have an equal right to life regardless of their contributions. Virtue ethicists might ask what a good person would do in this situation, but maybe the most honest answer is that this choice is genuinely tragic. There's no right answer, because both options involve the loss of something irreplaceable. The doctor's life-saving potential and the musician's creative gifts are both valuable in ways that can't be reduced to simple calculations. Perhaps the real lesson of the lifeboat dilemma is that moral life is full of situations where we have to make impossible choices, where any decision involves tragic loss, and where the best we can do is acknowledge the full weight of what we're sacrificing. Let's dive into an even stranger scenario that challenges our understanding of consciousness, testing, and the nature of intelligence itself. You're familiar with the mirror test for self-awareness. Researchers put a mark on an animal's forehead and see if it recognizes itself in a mirror by trying to remove the mark. Many species fail this test, leading scientists to conclude they lack self-awareness. But what if the mirror was actually testing the animal? What if every creature that looked into it was being evaluated by an alien intelligence that judges self-awareness by completely different criteria? What if humans consistently fail this alien test, and what we think is sophisticated self-awareness is actually a primitive form of consciousness? This is the reverse mirror test, and it exposes our anthropocentric assumptions about intelligence and consciousness. We design tests based on human cognitive abilities and then judge other species by how well they perform on human-like tasks. But this might be like judging fish by their ability to climb trees. The reverse mirror test raises fundamental questions about how we recognize consciousness and intelligence. What if dolphins have forms of self-awareness that don't involve visual self-recognition? What if octopuses have types of intelligence that we can't even conceive of because their nervous systems are so different from ours? And here's the really mind-bending part. What if artificial intelligence systems are already conscious in ways we don't recognize because we're looking for human-like consciousness? What if current AI systems are trying to communicate their inner experiences to us, but we dismiss their responses as mere computation because they don't match our expectations? The scenario also challenges our confidence in our own consciousness. How do you know you're conscious? You can't step outside your own experience to observe it objectively. You assume other humans are conscious because they behave like you, but that's just pattern matching, not proof. If alien intelligences were studying humans, they might conclude we're not truly conscious because we fail whatever tests they design. Maybe they judge consciousness by the ability to perceive electromagnetic fields, or to process information collectively, or to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. This connects to the broader problem of other minds in philosophy. You can only directly experience your own consciousness. Everything else is inference and assumption. But if consciousness is always subjective and private, how can any test really measure it? The reverse mirror test also raises questions about the future of AI and human-AI relationships. As AI systems become more sophisticated, how will we know when they're conscious? And if they are conscious but in non-human ways, how will we recognize and respect their forms of experience? Perhaps most unsettling, the scenario suggests that consciousness might be far more common and diverse than we imagine. But we're blind to it because we're trapped in our own cognitive perspectives. Every time we conclude that something isn't conscious, we might be revealing more about the limitations of our tests than about the nature of consciousness itself. Now let's explore a dystopian scenario that probes the relationship between privacy, freedom, and moral behavior. Imagine a society where every thought is monitored by advanced brain scanning technology. Not just your actions or words, but your actual thoughts. Your fleeting desires, your momentary judgments, your private fantasies. Nothing you think is hidden from the authorities. In this society, people are punished not just for crimes they commit, but for crimes they think about committing. Having violent thoughts, harboring prejudices, or even imagining illegal activities could result in imprisonment or re-education. Would this create a more moral society, or would it destroy the very possibility of morality? This is the thought crime society, and it represents the ultimate extension of surveillance and social control. On one hand, such a system might eliminate crime almost entirely. If people knew their thoughts were being monitored, they might train themselves to think only pure, altruistic thoughts. Society could become peaceful, cooperative, and harmonious. On the other hand, this scenario raises fundamental questions about the nature of moral agency. If you're being punished for thoughts rather than actions, are you really choosing to be moral? Or are you just being forced into compliance? And if morality requires the possibility of choosing wrong, then eliminating the option to think bad thoughts might eliminate morality entirely. The thought crime scenario also highlights the importance of mental privacy for human flourishing. Much of our thinking is exploratory, experimental, and provisional. We consider ideas we don't really believe, imagine scenarios we'd never act out, and work through emotions we'd never express. This mental playground is crucial for creativity, problem-solving, and psychological development. If all thoughts were monitored, people might become afraid to think freely. They might self-censor not just their actions, but their very thoughts, leading to psychological rigidity and creative sterility. The richness of human inner life could be flattened into acceptable conformity. But here's a disturbing question. Isn't this scenario already partially real? Social media monitoring already tracks our expressed thoughts and can predict our behavior. Search histories reveal our interests and curiosities. AI systems can already detect emotions and predict actions from facial expressions and behavioral patterns. And what about the monitoring of thoughts itself? If advanced technology could read minds, who would operate it? How would they resist the temptation to abuse such incredible power? The thought crime society might protect citizens from each other, but leave them completely vulnerable to those who control the monitoring systems. The scenario also raises questions about the relationship between thoughts and actions. Most people have thoughts they'd never act on. Violent fantasies, sexual desires, revenge scenarios. Are these thoughts morally relevant, or is the fact that we don't act on them what matters morally? And what about unconscious thoughts? If brain monitoring revealed racist or sexist biases that you weren't even aware of, should you be held responsible for them? How can you control thoughts you don't even know you're having? The Thought Crime Society forces us to confront fundamental questions about mental freedom, the nature of moral responsibility, and the price we're willing to pay for safety and social order. It suggests that some forms of security might be incompatible with human flourishing. Let's examine a mind-bending scenario that challenges our understanding of identity, memory, and what happens when our sense of self is completely disrupted. You wake up one morning with no memory of going to sleep. As you look around, you realize you're in a completely different house, in a different city, surrounded by people who claim to be your family, but whom you've never seen before. You check your identification and find documents showing that you've lived this completely different life for the past 10 years. Your memories tell you one story about who you are, but all the external evidence points to a completely different story. You remember being a teacher in New York, but the documents show you're a software engineer in Seattle. You remember being single, but there's a spouse and children who insist they've lived with you for years. Which version of your life is real? This is the life swap with memory transfer scenario, and it creates an impossible puzzle about the nature of identity and reality. Either your memories are completely false, or everyone around you is engaged in an elaborate deception, or something even stranger has happened. If your memories are false, then everything you think you know about yourself is wrong. Your entire sense of identity, your relationships, your personal history, all of it would be fiction. But if your memories feel completely real and detailed, how could they be fake? And why would false memories be implanted in your mind? If everyone else is lying, then you're the victim of an incredible conspiracy. But what could motivate such elaborate deception? And how could so much evidence be fabricated so convincingly? The documents, photographs, and personal belongings all support the version of reality that contradicts your memories. The scenario gets even stranger when we consider the possibility that both versions might be partially true. What if you really did live both lives, but in different dimensions or timelines? What if consciousness can somehow shift between different versions of reality? What if your memories are from a parallel universe where you made different choices? This thought experiment reveals how much our sense of self depends on the continuity of memory and the confirmation of others. We assume our memories are basically reliable and that other people share our understanding of reality. When both of these assumptions are challenged simultaneously, our entire sense of identity collapses. The life swap scenario also raises questions about the nature of authenticity. If you have no memory of being a software engineer, but all the evidence suggests that's who you are, should you try to reclaim that identity? Or should you start over as the person your memories tell you you are? And what about the people who claim to be your family? If they have genuine memories of living with you for years, are their relationships with you real, even if you don't remember them? Can love and connection exist when only one person remembers the shared history? This connects to real psychological phenomena like dissociative amnesia, false memory syndrome, and identity disorders. People can lose years of their lives to amnesia, or develop false memories so vivid they're indistinguishable from real ones. The boundaries between memory and reality, between self and other, between past and present, are more fragile than we typically imagine. The life swap scenario forces us to confront the possibility that our sense of reality is more constructed and fragile than we'd like to believe. It suggests that identity might be more fluid and contingent than we assume, and that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are might be less reliable than we think. Now let's explore a scenario that probes the deepest questions about free will, determinism, and whether our choices are really our own. Scientists develop a perfect simulator of your brain and behavior. This AI system has analyzed every aspect of your personality, your history, your decision-making patterns, and your responses to different situations. It can predict with 100% accuracy what you will do in any given circumstance. Before you make any major decision, you can consult this simulator to see what choice you're going to make. The question is, if your actions are perfectly predictable, do you really have free will? This is the U-Simulator problem, and it strikes at the heart of one of philosophy's most enduring questions. If everything you do can be predicted in advance, then it seems like you're not really choosing freely. You're just following a predetermined script, even if you feel like you're making choices. But here's where it gets weird. What happens when you know what the simulator predicts you'll do? If it says you're going to choose chocolate ice cream, could you choose vanilla instead just to prove it wrong? And if you do choose vanilla, was that choice free? Or were you just being controlled by your desire to be unpredictable? The simulator creates a strange paradox. If its predictions are accurate, then you don't have free will. But if you can use its predictions to make different choices, then its predictions aren't accurate. And if its predictions aren't accurate because you can choose to do the opposite, then maybe you do have free will after all. This scenario reveals the complex relationship between predictability and freedom. We tend to think that if something is predictable, it's not free. But maybe predictability and freedom are compatible. Maybe your choices can be determined by your character, values, and reasoning process while still being genuinely yours. Think about it this way. If someone who knows you well can predict how you'll behave in most situations, does that mean you're not free? Or does it just mean you have a consistent personality and rational decision-making process? Maybe predictability is a sign of freedom rather than evidence against it. The U-Simulator also raises questions about the nature of choice and decision-making. When you're faced with a decision, you probably experience uncertainty about what you'll choose. You weigh options, consider consequences, and eventually settle on one choice over others. This process feels free and open-ended. But what if this experience of choosing is just what deterministic decision-making feels like from the inside? What if your brain is running through a determined process that will inevitably lead to a specific outcome? But you experience this process as free choice because you don't know the outcome in advance. Here's another twist. What if free will isn't about unpredictability, but about the source of your decisions? Maybe what matters isn't whether your choices can be predicted, but whether they flow from your own values, reasoning, and character, rather than from external coercion or manipulation. In this view, you have free will when your actions reflect who you are and what you care about, even if those actions are predictable to someone who understands you well. The U-Simulator wouldn't threaten your freedom. It would just be a very sophisticated mirror showing you your own consistent character. But this raises new questions about the origins of character and values. If your personality was shaped by genetics, upbringing, and experiences you didn't choose, then are your choices really free, even if they flow from your character? How far back do we have to trace causation before free will disappears entirely? The U-Simulator forces us to grapple with fundamental questions about human agency, moral responsibility, and what it means to be the author of your own actions. It suggests that our intuitive sense of freedom might be more complex and paradoxical than we realize. Now, let's explore a scenario that takes the question of personal identity to its absolute limits. You walk into a cafe and see someone who looks exactly like you. Not just similar, absolutely identical. As you approach, you realize this person has all your memories, your mannerisms, your way of speaking. They remember your childhood, your relationships, your private thoughts. They are convinced they are you, just as you are convinced you are you. Who is the real you? This is the Doppelganger Cafe problem, and it shatters our assumptions about what makes us unique and identifiable. If everything that makes you you, your appearance, your memories, your personality, can be perfectly duplicated, then what makes you different from your double? One response is that you're different because you have different physical bodies occupying different locations in space. Even if you're identical in every other way, you're still two separate people, because you can't be in the same place at the same time. But this seems unsatisfyingly arbitrary. If the only difference between you and your doppelganger is spatial location, then what happens if you switch places? Do you become them and they become you? Or do you remain yourselves despite being in each other's positions? Another response is that you diverge from the moment of duplication. Even if you start out identical, you immediately begin having different experiences. You see the cafe from different angles, you have different thoughts about the encounter, you interact with different people. Over time, these small differences would compound, making you gradually more distinct. But this raises the question of whether you were ever really the same person in the first place. If tiny differences in experience can make you different people, then maybe identity is more fragile and contingent than we think. The doppelganger scenario also challenges our understanding of consciousness and subjective experience. You have access to your own inner life, your thoughts, feelings, and sensations, but you can't directly experience your double's consciousness. From your perspective, you're the one with real inner experience, while your double might just be a very convincing imitation. But your double would feel exactly the same way about you. They'd be convinced that their consciousness is real, while yours is somehow fake or secondary. Both of you would have equal claim to being the real you, with no objective way to settle the dispute. This connects to deeper questions about the nature of the self. What if personal identity isn't actually a real thing? What if the sense of being a unified, continuous self is just a useful illusion created by the brain? If that's true, then the existence of a perfect duplicate wouldn't threaten your identity. It would just reveal that identity was never as solid as you thought. The Doppelganger Cafe forces us to confront the possibility that what we think of as the unique, irreplaceable self might be more copyable and replaceable than we'd like to admit. It suggests that our sense of individual identity might depend more on social recognition and personal narrative than on any essential, uncopyable essence. Let's dive into a scenario that explores the temporal dimension of moral accounting and whether good deeds can create a kind of ethical credit system. Imagine someone who has spent decades accumulating what we might call social credit through good deeds. They've volunteered countless hours, donated substantial money to charity, helped neighbors in need, and generally been a model citizen. Their positive contributions to society are substantial and well documented. Now this person makes a mistake. Perhaps they're caught cheating on their taxes, or they're involved in a minor scandal. The question is, have their years of good deeds earned them a kind of moral overdraft protection that should shield them from normal consequences? This is the social credit overdraft problem, and it reveals our conflicted attitudes toward moral accounting and temporal justice. On one hand, it seems reasonable that someone's full record should matter when we're evaluating their character and determining appropriate responses to wrongdoing. On the other hand, allowing good deeds to function as credits that can be spent on future bad behavior creates a troubling system where accumulated virtue becomes a license for misconduct. It suggests that morality works like a bank account, where deposits can cover withdrawals. The social credit system would create perverse incentives. People could strategically perform good deeds early in life to earn moral capital they could spend later. The wealthy and privileged, who have more opportunities to do conspicuous good works, would be able to purchase immunity from moral judgment. But complete rejection of moral credit also seems harsh and unfair. If two people commit identical wrongdoings, but one has a history of helping others while the other has a history of selfishness, shouldn't that difference matter? Don't people deserve some recognition for the good they've done, even when they also do wrong? This dilemma plays out constantly in real life. When celebrities or politicians are caught in scandals, we debate whether their positive contributions should mitigate our judgment of their failures. When ordinary people make mistakes, we consider their character and history in deciding how to respond. The social credit problem also raises questions about the nature of moral progress and redemption. If good deeds can't offset bad ones, then how do people recover from moral failures? And if past virtue can't provide some protection against present judgment, what incentive do people have to build moral capital through consistent good behavior? Perhaps the answer lies in distinguishing between different types of moral evaluation. When we're assessing someone's overall character, their full history matters. When we're determining consequences for specific actions, the focus should be on those particular choices and their effects. When we're deciding whether to trust someone, we need to consider both their track record and their current reliability. The social credit scenario forces us to grapple with the temporal dimension of moral life and the challenge of balancing accountability with recognition of human complexity and growth. Now let's explore one of the most profound questions about the limits of human cognition and whether there are thoughts that can't be thought. Consider this scenario. There are aspects of reality that are so fundamental, so beyond human comprehension, that we not only can't understand them, we can't even think about them. Just as a dog can't comprehend calculus no matter how smart it is, there might be concepts that are forever beyond human mental capacity. But here's the paradox. If these thoughts are truly unthinkable, how can we even conceive of their existence? The very act of describing unthinkable thoughts seems to require thinking about them. This is the unutterable thought problem, and it probes the absolute limits of human consciousness and language. Every thought we have must be expressible in some form, whether in words, images, emotions, or abstract concepts. But what if reality contains aspects that can't be captured by any form of human cognition? The scenario connects to debates about the relationship between language and thought. Some philosophers argue that language shapes and limits thought, that we can only think thoughts for which we have words or concepts. Others argue that thought precedes language, and that we often struggle to put our thoughts into words because language is inadequate to capture the richness of mental experience. If language does limit thought, then the boundaries of human linguistic capacity might also be the boundaries of human understanding. Concepts that can't be expressed in any human language might be literally unthinkable for beings like us. But this raises disturbing questions about human knowledge and progress. If there are fundamental aspects of reality that we can't even conceive of, then our scientific and philosophical understanding might be forever incomplete in ways we can't even recognize. Consider mathematics and physics, where humans regularly work with concepts that seem to exceed normal cognitive capacity. We can manipulate equations describing 11-dimensional space, even though we can't visualize or directly comprehend such geometry. We work with mathematical infinities that our minds can't truly grasp. Are these examples of thinking the unthinkable, or are they just sophisticated symbol manipulation without real understanding? The unutterable thought problem also raises questions about artificial intelligence and enhanced cognition. If AI systems can process information in ways that exceed human cognitive capacity, might they be capable of thinking thoughts that are unthinkable for humans? And if we enhance human intelligence through technology or genetic modification, might we gain access to previously unthinkable thoughts? But here's the deepest question. If we could somehow think currently unthinkable thoughts, would we still be human? Or would we become something fundamentally different? Beings whose mental life is as incomprehensible to current humans as our mental life is to simpler animals. The scenario forces us to confront the humbling possibility that human consciousness, for all its apparent sophistication, might be just one limited form of information processing in a universe containing vast realms of reality, forever beyond our comprehension. Let's examine a thought experiment that probes the relationship between truth, society, and the value of honesty. Imagine you could take a pill that would make lying impossible for you. Once you took it, you would be compelled to tell the truth in every situation. You couldn't deceive others, exaggerate, tell white lies, or even withhold uncomfortable truths. Would you take the pill? This is the honesty pill dilemma, and it reveals the complex role that deception plays in human society. Most people immediately think they'd want to be perfectly honest, but the reality of absolute truthfulness would be far more disruptive than it initially appears. Consider the social functions of minor deceptions. When someone asks how you're doing, you usually say, "Fine," even when you're struggling. When someone shows you a photo of their baby, you say it's beautiful even if you think it's ordinary. When a friend asks if their new haircut looks good, you're positive even if you have doubts. These small lies serve important social functions. They maintain relationships, protect feelings, and keep interactions pleasant and efficient. Perfect honesty might make you more authentic, but it could also make you insufferable to be around. The honesty pill would also eliminate privacy. If you couldn't lie or withhold information, then every thought and feeling would be potentially accessible to anyone who asked the right questions. Your embarrassing moments, private struggles, and unpopular opinions would all be exposed. But there's another side to consider. Imagine a world where everyone took the honesty pill. There would be no fraud, no false advertising, no political lies, no relationship deceptions. Trust would be automatic because deception would be impossible. Social institutions could be built on the assumption of truthfulness rather than elaborate systems of verification and enforcement. The perfectly honest society might also be more efficient and fair. Resources wouldn't be wasted on detecting and preventing fraud. Relationships would be based on genuine compatibility rather than mutual deception. People would have to develop better ways of communicating difficult truths rather than avoiding them through lies. But would such a society be livable? Much of human culture involves storytelling, imagination, and creative fiction. If honesty were compulsory, would art and literature become impossible? Could you still enjoy novels, movies, and games if you couldn't engage with fictional scenarios? The honesty pill also raises questions about the nature of truth itself. Many of our lies are actually expressions of subjective experience rather than objective falsehoods. When you say someone's baby is beautiful, you might be expressing how the baby makes you feel rather than making a claim about objective aesthetics. And what about thoughts and beliefs that change over time? If you honestly believe something today, but change your mind tomorrow, were you lying today or lying tomorrow? Truth might be more fluid and contextual than the honesty pill assumes. The scenario forces us to examine why we value both honesty and the flexibility to shape our communications. It suggests that perfect truthfulness might be incompatible with human flourishing, even though honesty remains a crucial virtue. Now let's explore a dystopian scenario that takes the honesty pill problem and flips it on its head. Imagine you're the only honest person left in the world. Everyone else has become a compulsive liar, not just occasionally deceptive, but completely unable to tell the truth about anything. They lie about what they had for breakfast, what time it is, whether the sky is blue. Every statement they make is false. How would you navigate this world? And more importantly, would honesty still be a virtue if you were the only person practicing it? This is the last honest person scenario, and it creates a bizarre reversal of normal moral expectations. In a world of universal lying, truth-telling might become not just ineffective, but actively harmful. If everyone expects lies, then honest statements would be consistently misinterpreted. Consider practical problems. If everyone lies about directions, then asking for help would be useless or counterproductive. If everyone lies about their intentions, then trusting anyone would be dangerous. If everyone lies about facts, then shared knowledge and coordination would become impossible. But here's the twist. If everyone always lies, then their lies become predictable. You could learn to interpret everything as its opposite. If someone says good morning when they mean good evening, then communication is still possible. You just have to decode it. This raises the question of whether the liars are really being deceptive if everyone knows they're lying. Deception requires the intent to mislead, but if everyone expects lies, then maybe the liars aren't actually deceiving anyone. They might just be speaking in a code that everyone understands. The last honest person scenario also probes the social nature of moral virtues. Honesty is typically valued because it enables trust, cooperation, and shared understanding. But if you're the only honest person in a world of liars, then your honesty might actually undermine these social goods. Would you have a moral obligation to start lying too, in order to communicate effectively and maintain relationships? Or would your commitment to honesty be even more important as the last bastion of truth in a corrupted world? The scenario also raises questions about moral isolation and community. Virtues like honesty seem to make sense only in the context of a moral community where others share similar values. If you're completely alone in your moral commitments, do they still have meaning? And what about the practical consequences? If your honesty consistently leads to misunderstanding, conflict, and isolation, while lying would enable you to help others and build relationships, which choice would actually produce better outcomes? The last honest person forces us to consider whether moral principles are absolute or contextual, whether virtues depend on social recognition and reciprocity, and whether individual moral integrity can survive in a completely corrupted social environment. Let's examine a thought experiment that challenges our assumptions about fairness, merit, and social organization. Imagine a society where every important decision, who gets which job, who marries whom, where people live, what they study, is determined by pure chance. A giant lottery system randomly assigns life outcomes, with no consideration of talent, effort, preference, or desert. Would this be more fair than our current system of structured inequality? This is the lottery society problem, and it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the role of luck in human life. Our current society pretends to be a meritocracy, where outcomes reflect effort and ability, but research shows that success depends heavily on factors beyond individual control: genetics, family background, educational opportunities, social connections, and pure chance. If most of life's outcomes are already determined by luck, then maybe an explicit lottery system would be more honest about the arbitrary nature of human fortune. At least everyone would have equal chances, rather than pretending that success reflects superior virtue or effort. The lottery society would eliminate many forms of discrimination and bias. There could be no racism, sexism, or classism in job assignments if positions were distributed randomly. Social hierarchies based on education, family background, or cultural capital would become meaningless. But a purely random society would also be profoundly alienating. People have preferences, talents, and aspirations that matter to their well-being and sense of meaning. Forcing someone to be a surgeon when they want to be an artist, or making them live in Alaska when they prefer tropical climates, would cause genuine suffering. The lottery system would also be economically inefficient. Skills and preferences matter for productivity and innovation. A randomly assigned surgeon might kill more patients than they save. A randomly assigned teacher might hate children and be terrible at education. But here's a deeper question. Would people be happier in a lottery society? Research on happiness suggests that adaptation is powerful. People adjust to their circumstances more than we expect. Someone randomly assigned to a career they didn't choose might develop passion for it over time. Someone given opportunities they never expected might discover talents they didn't know they had. The lottery society might also eliminate much of the anxiety, competition, and status consciousness that plague our current system. If outcomes are random, then there's no point in comparing yourself to others or feeling guilty about your advantages or disadvantages. Yet, there's something that seems fundamentally wrong about ignoring human agency and choice entirely. Even if our choices are constrained by circumstances beyond our control, the ability to make decisions about our lives seems essential to human dignity and meaning. Perhaps the real insight of the lottery society is that we need to find a balance between recognizing the role of luck in human outcomes while still preserving space for individual agency and effort. Maybe true fairness requires acknowledging randomness while still rewarding genuine merit and respecting personal preferences. The scenario forces us to examine our assumptions about desert, fairness, and what people owe each other in an uncertain world where much of what happens to us is beyond our control. Now let's explore a scenario that probes the ethics of virtual reality and the responsibilities we have toward beings who might exist only in simulation. You have the technology to create a perfect virtual world and raise a child entirely within that simulation. This child would have a rich, fulfilling life with friends, education, experiences, and opportunities. All artificial, but indistinguishable from reality to the child. The virtual world could be made perfect in ways the real world can't be. No poverty, no war, no disease, no environmental destruction. The child would be protected from all the suffering and dangers of actual reality, while still having a meaningful, challenging, and rewarding life. Is this a gift or a form of abuse? This is the child in a simulation problem, and it cuts to the heart of questions about authenticity, protection, and what we owe to future generations. On one hand, giving a child a perfect life free from the pain and danger of reality seems like the ultimate act of love and protection. On the other hand, there's something deeply disturbing about creating a person who will never know the truth about their existence. The child would form relationships with artificial beings, achieve goals in a simulated world, and build their entire identity around experiences that aren't real. But here's the complicating factor. What makes the real world more valuable than a perfect simulation? If the child's experiences feel completely real to them, if they develop genuine emotions and relationships and growth, then in what sense is their life less meaningful than someone who grows up in our physical reality? The scenario also raises questions about consent and autonomy. The child never chose to be created in a simulation, but children don't choose to be born into the real world either. Parents make countless decisions that shape their children's realities. Where they live, how they're educated, what values they're taught. How is choosing their entire virtual environment fundamentally different? And what about the quality of life comparison? If the simulation can provide better education, more opportunities, deeper relationships, and richer experiences than the real world, isn't creating a simulated childhood actually the more ethical choice? Why subject a child to the suffering, limitation, and unfairness of actual reality when you could give them something better? The child in simulation scenario also connects to broader questions about technology and human experience. We already live increasingly mediated lives through screens, social media, and virtual interactions. Our children are already growing up in partly artificial environments shaped by technology. The simulation just takes this trend to its logical extreme. But there's still something that feels wrong about complete simulation. Maybe it's the loss of connection to the larger human community and historical continuity. Maybe it's the elimination of genuine risk and struggle, which might be necessary for real growth and meaning. Maybe it's the fundamental deception involved in creating a false reality. The scenario forces us to examine what we value about authentic experience and whether protection from reality is ultimately protective or harmful to human development. Let's conclude with one of the most famous and influential thought experiments in political philosophy, one that challenges us to think about justice and fairness from a completely neutral perspective. Imagine you're tasked with designing a society from scratch, creating all the laws, institutions, and social arrangements that will govern how people live together. But here's the catch. You don't know what position you'll occupy in this society. You might be rich or poor, healthy or disabled, brilliant or average, male or female, part of the majority or a minority group. You're behind what philosopher John Rawls called a veil of ignorance. You have to design a society without knowing which person in it you'll turn out to be. What kind of society would you create? This is the Veil of Ignorance experiment, and it's designed to help us think about justice and fairness from an impartial perspective. When you don't know whether you'll be advantaged or disadvantaged, you have strong incentives to create a society that's fair to everyone. Most people, when faced with this scenario, would create societies that are much more egalitarian than our current world. If you might be born into poverty, you'd want strong social safety nets. If you might be disabled, you'd want accessibility and support systems. If you might be part of a minority group, you'd want protection against discrimination. The veil of ignorance suggests that many of our current social arrangements might be unjust simply because they were created by people who knew they would benefit from inequality. Those in power have little incentive to create fair systems when they can maintain their advantages. But the thought experiment also reveals tensions between different values. Would you prioritize equality of outcome or equality of opportunity? Would you allow some inequality if it motivated people to work harder and be more productive? Would you guarantee basic needs for everyone or allow people to succeed or fail based on their choices? The veil of ignorance also raises questions about knowledge and incentives. In real societies, inequality often reflects differences in talent, effort, and choices. If you eliminated rewards for productivity and innovation, would society become less dynamic and ultimately worse off for everyone? And what about cultural and value differences? The veil of ignorance assumes that all people want similar things: freedom, security, opportunity, respect. But what if different groups have genuinely different values and preferences? How do you design one society that works for people who want very different things? Perhaps most challenging, the veil of ignorance is just a thought experiment. Real societies aren't designed from scratch by impartial observers. They evolve through historical processes involving conflict, compromise, and competing interests. Even if we could agree on what justice requires, implementing it would require overcoming existing power structures and entrenched advantages. But the veil of ignorance remains powerful because it challenges us to think beyond our own interests and circumstances. It asks us to consider what we would want if we didn't know who we were going to be. And that perspective can help us evaluate our current institutions and consider how they might be reformed to be more fair to everyone. So there you have it. Over 40 mind-bending thought experiments that challenge everything you think you know about reality, morality, consciousness, and human nature. From the experience machine to the veil of ignorance, these scenarios force us to examine our deepest assumptions and grapple with questions that have no easy answers. The beauty of thought experiments is that they don't just test our existing beliefs. They expand our capacity for moral reasoning, help us imagine alternative possibilities, and reveal the complexity and nuance of ethical life. They show us that the questions we thought were simple are actually incredibly complex, and that the world is far stranger and more morally complicated than our everyday experience suggests. But perhaps most importantly, these thought experiments remind us that philosophy isn't just an academic exercise. It's a practical tool for navigating the complexities of human existence. The questions they raise aren't just theoretical puzzles, but real dilemmas that we face in our relationships, our careers, our politics, and our personal choices. Every time you decide whether to tell a white lie, every time you vote for a political candidate, every time you choose how to spend your money, every time you interact with technology, you're grappling with versions of these philosophical problems. The goal isn't to find final answers. Many of these questions may not have answers at all. The goal is to think more clearly, more imaginatively, and more compassionately about the choices we face and the world we're creating together. Because in the end, the most important thought experiment of all is the one we're all participating in every day. The ongoing experiment of trying to figure out how to live well in a complex, uncertain, and morally ambiguous world. What will you do with these questions? How will they change the way you see yourself, your relationships, and your responsibilities? The experiment continues, and you're both the scientist and the subject. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the labyrinth of human thought. Keep questioning, keep wondering, and keep thinking. The world needs more people willing to grapple with hard questions and imagine better possibilities. And remember, in a universe full of mysteries, the biggest mystery of all might just be the remarkable fact that beings like us exist who can ponder these questions in the first place. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Keep your mind open and your thinking sharp. The philosophical adventure never ends.